Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're going to explore something really fascinating.
Yeah.
We're going to get into Taiwanese identity.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, and we're not going to do it through, just like regular old research articles. We're actually going to use photographic ethnography.
Oh, wow.
Have you ever thought about like how a single photo can reveal so much about a culture?
It's true. Photos can capture the stuff that's not said, like the values, rituals, even anxieties in ways that words just they can't do it justice.
Exactly. It's like getting a glimpse into a community's soul,
Yeah.
right? And that's what makes this deep dive so intriguing. It's not just looking at like pretty pictures, but we're actually going to use these photos as data to understand all those different layers of Taiwanese identity. We'll be looking at Taiwan today and even speculating about the future, all anchored in this question: what is Taiwan? And get this, our main source material is from Brian David Phillips. He's an associate professor in Taiwan, and he blends traditional English literature with cutting-edge AI applications in education.
Wow. Now that is unique.
All right, so let's unpack all of this.
Okay.
So before we jump into the specifics of Taiwan, I think it's important to remember that photographic ethnography itself has evolved a lot over time.
Right.
Like way back in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, is often used to document what were considered exotic cultures, but, from a less than sensitive perspective.
Yeah.
I've seen some of those old photos.
Yeah.
It often feels like they're othering the communities that they're supposed to be documenting. Not exactly the most ethical approach, huh?
No, not at all. Back then, the power dynamic was just completely skewed. But thankfully, over time, photographic ethnography has evolved to become much more collaborative and ethical. So now, consent and respect for the communities are like the most important things.
Yeah, that's a huge shift. And it kind of mirrors all those conversations we're having about representation and who gets to tell whose story, right?
Absolutely.
Definitely raises some big questions, especially when we're talking about something as personal and complex as identity. It's
Yeah.
not a static thing. It's constantly changing, being shaped by so many things.
Yeah, that's true. The source material highlights this by focusing on two key themes, really intertwined to shape Taiwanese identity. Those are transdisciplinary creativity and symbiosis.
Okay, I got to admit, those sound a little academic. Could you break those down for us?
Oh, of course. So, transdisciplinary creativity, that just means looking at identity through many different lenses, not just one.
Right.
Blending perspectives from fields like sociology, art, history, even AI to really understand the whole picture.
Yeah.
Think of it like putting together this super complex puzzle, but you're using pieces from like all kinds of different boxes.
I like that. Makes it much clearer. What about symbiosis? What role does that play in Taiwan?
Symbiosis is all about that coexistence, and mutual growth between different groups. It's like understanding how the different communities in Taiwan, indigenous peoples, immigrants, different generations, all of them not only live together, but how they actually influence and shape each other's cultures.
So it's like a really vibrant ecosystem where different species are thriving, but they all depend on each other.
Exactly.
And is this idea of symbiosis, is that reflected in the photographs themselves?
Oh, yeah, for sure. The photos really bring these concepts to life. For
Yeah.
example, there's this a one striking contrast between urban and rural life. You'll see these dynamic images of Taipei. It's this bustling metropolis with Taipei 101, that iconic skyscraper reaching for the sky.
Right, I've seen pictures.
But then you're also shown these serene photos of Hakka farmers. They're working in rice paddies, surrounded by these beautiful green mountains.
It's like you see that stark contrast, and you immediately start to wonder, like, how can these two seemingly different worlds coexist within the same national identity?
Right.
It's like tradition and modernity are doing this delicate dance together.
Exactly.
But you have to wonder, is it a harmonious dance or is it full of tension?
Yeah, that's the question the photographs kind of make you think about. And honestly, there's no simple answer. The source material suggests that this coexistence, however complicated it is, that actually defines Taiwan. It's not just about preserving the past or racing towards the future, but finding a way for both to exist in a world that's always changing.
Okay, yeah, that's a really insightful observation.
Yeah.
And speaking of different worlds coexisting, the source also highlights how resilient Taiwan's indigenous communities are. There were these photos of these vibrant festivals, traditional clothing, daily life just happening in villages that seem worlds away from the busy streets of Taipei.
Yeah, those images are a great reminder that Taiwan's identity is it's not a single thing, it's not a monolith, it's a tapestry made up of all these different cultural threads. And indigenous communities, even though they've faced a lot of challenges historically and pressures to assimilate, they've really fought hard to hold on to their own languages, customs, and beliefs.
Yeah. It's like their story is one of, strength and resistance,
Yeah.
holding on to who they are, even in the face of rapid modernization and globalization.
Right.
It makes you wonder, how do they navigate that pull between, holding on to tradition and that allure of a globalized way of life?
That's a really important question, and it's one that resonates with a lot of young people in Taiwan, not just those from indigenous communities. And you can see that tension playing out in how the source material explores youth subcultures. Like,
Yeah.
you see hip hop dancers, you see cosplayers, and you get the sense that they're embracing global trends, but they're doing it with their own, like, unique Taiwanese twists.
So it's not just a simple choice between the two.
Right.
It's about figuring out how to blend the global with the local to create something totally new. It's like they're remixing culture, taking inspiration from all these different places and making it their own.
Exactly. And that theme of, remixing, adapting, that seems to be woven into like the very core of Taiwanese society. We can see that in the photographs of traditional night markets. They're so lively, bustling with activity. But now, alongside all the amazing food stalls, you'll see young entrepreneurs selling handcrafted goods. They're incorporating like these modern design elements into traditional crafts.
So it's tradition being reinvented for a new generation.
That's a great way to put it.
It's like this fascinating blend of old and new. Reminds me of this quote I read a while back. It said, "Tradition is not the worship of ashes, but the preservation of fire."
Wow.
It's about keeping the essence alive, right? But letting it evolve and change with the times.
That's a perfect way to describe it. And that ability to adapt, that's going to be really important when we're thinking about the future of Taiwanese identity. And this is where the source material gets really interesting. It doesn't just document what is, it starts to use AI-generated imagery to explore potential future scenarios.
Wait, hold on. AI-generated images.
Yeah.
That's a pretty cool approach.
Much.
So we're not just looking at what is, but imagining what could be.
Exactly.
Wow.
And these AI-generated images, they offer these glimpses into some possible futures for Taiwan. One scenario shows, like, a Taipei transformed by technology. Imagine sleek skyscrapers covered in green infrastructure, self-driving cars navigating the streets, and technology just seamlessly integrated into everyday life. It's a vision of the super modern city that's also trying to be sustainable.
That sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
But it makes you think, right? Like, what happens to the human element of Taiwanese identity when technology advances so rapidly? Does it bring people closer together, or does it lead to more isolation?
Those are the exact questions the images raise, but without giving you any easy answers.
Right.
And that's what makes them so interesting, so thought-provoking. They don't offer solutions, but they make us consider the complexity and the potential pitfalls of all this progress.
It's like holding up a mirror to society and asking, like, is this where we want to go? Are we happy with this future, or do we need to change course?
Exactly. And then you see another set of AI-generated images that focus on like potential positive outcomes. You'll see coastal villages powered by wind turbines, these lush reforested areas, and communities actively involved in restoring the environment. It's this vision of a future where Taiwan doesn't just adapt to climate change, but it actually becomes like a leader in sustainability.
That's a much more optimistic picture.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people would hope for that.
Yeah.
But it also makes you ask yourself, what choices do we need to make today to make sure that future actually happens? It's like those images are both a challenge and a call to action, all at the same time.
Exactly. And it's not just about, coming up with technological innovations or changing policies. It's about changing the way we think, like really understanding that our own well-being is tied to the health of the planet. These images are saying that environmental awareness could be a key part of Taiwanese identity in the future.
Okay, so we've talked about the present, we've looked at some potential futures, but what about, like, the ideal future for Taiwan? Is there a vision for what that identity could be?
Yes, and this is where the source material gets, like, really ambitious. It uses AI-generated images to present this vision of an ideal future, one based on inclusivity, environmental restoration, and this deep appreciation for cultural heritage. But before we jump into those, I'm curious, what does an ideal Taiwan look like to you?
That's a tough one. I think for me, An ideal Taiwan would be a place that truly embraces all its diversity, where everyone feels like they belong, where, tradition and modernity exist in harmony, and where environmental sustainability is at the core of everything they do. But I know that's just my personal perspective. What about you? What resonates with you in this vision of an ideal future?
For me, the most powerful part is how it emphasizes symbiosis. And not just as like an idea, but as something people actually live by. These images show communities coming together, they're sharing resources, celebrating what makes them different, and working together to face whatever challenges come up. It's like this vision of a society that's more than just the sum of its parts, where everybody benefits from the collective strength of its diversity.
Wow, that's pretty inspiring. I'm really curious to see how these AI-generated images bring that vision to life.
Yeah, me too.
But before we do that, I think it's time for a quick break. We'll be right back to explore this ideal future and figure out what steps we can take to try and make it a reality.
So, are you ready to jump back into this ideal future our source material has given us?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, remember, we're talking about a Taiwan that's all about inclusivity, restoring the environment, and really valuing cultural heritage. And it all comes to life through these AI-generated images, which is so cool.
Yeah, it's a really interesting approach. What was the first image that really stuck out to you?
One that comes to mind is this image of a busy community center, and it's so full of life, so many different people, indigenous folks, LGBTQ plus individuals, immigrant families, young and old, all just kind of like mixing and mingling.
Yeah.
It's not about just like tolerating each other, it's about really interacting and having shared experiences.
Yeah, that's a really powerful image. It's like you're seeing that symbiosis we were talking about actually happening not just as this abstract idea, but as like a lived reality. It
Exactly.
makes you wonder, like, what are the things that make that kind of inclusivity possible? Is it about infrastructure, policies, or is it something deeper, like a change in attitudes?
That's a good question. The source material doesn't really give us a step-by-step guide on how to create this perfect world,
Right.
but I think that's like on purpose. It's more about making us think about the possibilities and asking ourselves, what can we actually do to move closer to this?
Yeah, it's like a challenge to everyone listening. What would it take to make that image of inclusivity real in your own community?
Exactly. And the next image kind of builds on that challenge by shifting our focus to the environment. Imagine like lush green mountains, the rivers are crystal clear, and the ecosystems are just thriving.
Okay. Yeah.
But what's really interesting is that you see all this untouched nature, and it's mixed with signs explaining the local biodiversity, and renewable energy installations are just blended into the landscape.
So it's not just about protecting nature for the sake of it. It's about integrating conservation efforts into how people live every day.
Right.
You have to wonder, is this a future where being environmentally aware isn't just some niche thing, but it's like a core value for everybody?
Precisely. And the images give you clues about how that shift could happen. You can see that communities are involved, people of all ages are actively working to restore the environment. It's not some top-down thing, it's a grassroots movement. And everyone feels responsible for taking care of their environment.
It's like those pictures are saying, this isn't just about government policies or scientific breakthroughs. It's about everyone working together to create a future that's actually sustainable.
Exactly. And the last image in the set takes us to the core of Taiwan's cultural heritage. Picture a huge cultural festival. It's this vibrant mix of tradition and celebration where indigenous Hakka and Hoklo communities, they all come together and share their dances, their music, their food. It's just this powerful visual representation of unity and cultural pride.
It's interesting how we started with that super modern cityscape of Taipei, explored these potential futures shaped by tech and sustainability, and now we're back to the roots of Taiwanese identity. It's like those images are reminding us that progress isn't about erasing the past, it's about using it as a foundation and finding ways to bring tradition and innovation together.
I totally agree. And it all goes back to that idea of symbiosis we talked about. It's realizing that all these things that seem so different, tech, sustainability, cultural heritage, they can actually work together to create a future for Taiwan that's richer and more resilient.
Okay, so we've seen this really optimistic vision for Taiwan's future. But let's be real, it's easy to get swept up in all these perfect images and forget that we're dealing with, complex real-world problems. How do we go from this dream future to the messy reality on the ground?
Well, Our source material doesn't try to avoid that question. It actually spends a good amount of time outlining real steps that we can take to try and make this ideal future happen. It's not just wishful thinking, it's about turning these aspirations into action.
Okay, now we're getting into the details. Let's break down these action steps and see how they connect to everything we've been discussing. Where do we even start?
The first step is all about education. That's key to changing how people think and nurturing that sense of shared identity. The source material argues that we need to include programs in schools and universities all over Taiwan that focus on diversity, empathy, and understanding different cultures.
That makes sense. If you want a society that embraces differences and values cultural heritage, you got to start by teaching the next generation those values.
Right.
But how do we go beyond just reading about it in a textbook and make these ideas really stick with students?
Well, the source has a really interesting suggestion. Getting students involved in photographic ethnography projects.
Oh, wow.
Imagine young people going out into their own communities, camera in hand, documenting the lives and stories of people from all sorts of backgrounds.
Yeah, that's a powerful way to build empathy and understanding. It's turning education into this hands-on experience, letting students get out of their comfort zones and see the world through different eyes.
Exactly. And when they document their experiences through photos, they're not just watching, they're actually contributing to the story of Taiwan's diverse identity. But education is only one piece of the puzzle. The source also points out how important it is to support cultural preservation through policy and funding.
That's true. If we want to keep traditions alive, we need to give them the resources to thrive. What kind of policies and funding does the source recommend?
It talks about strengthening programs that support, indigenous cultural practices, traditional crafts, festivals, all of it. It suggests setting up cultural centers in cities so more people can experience these traditions, and offering grants to artists and cultural practitioners.
So it's about creating spaces where tradition and modernity can exist together, and people can develop a deeper appreciation for Taiwan's cultural legacy.
Right.
And those grants would be essential for making sure that traditional knowledge and skills get passed down to younger generations. It's like investing in the future of Taiwanese identity.
Exactly. But preserving cultural heritage isn't enough. We also have to address the big issue of environmental sustainability. And the source really emphasizes that we need to keep investing in conservation, but with a focus on getting communities involved.
I'm noticing a pattern here.
Yeah.
It's not about just telling people what to do. It's about giving them the power to be active protectors of their own environment.
Yeah.
It's about fostering that sense of responsibility.
You got it. The source imagines a future where caring for the environment is just part of everyday life. It suggests expanding programs like reforestation, coastal cleanups, ecotourism, all with an emphasis on public participation. It's about building a culture where everyone feels responsible for protecting their natural heritage.
And I can see how photographic ethnography could be a powerful tool for this kind of movement. Imagine using those stunning images to show people Taiwan's natural beauty, the dangers it's facing, and the inspiring stories of individuals and communities fighting to protect it.
Exactly. Sometimes a picture really is worth 1,000 words. Those images can connect people to the environment on a deeper level, making them feel a sense of wonder, an urgency, a desire to actually do something. It's about using the power of visuals to get communities involved and create real change.
Okay, so we've got education, cultural preservation, and environmental conservation. What other actions does the source suggest?
What makes a strong argument for encouraging collaborations in research and the arts that cross disciplines. It's about breaking down the barriers between different fields, bringing together artists, scientists, social workers, activists, and giving them a chance to work together on projects that tackle complex problems.
Now, that's a really cool idea. It's acknowledging that no one field has all the answers. By bringing together all these different perspectives, you're much more likely to come up with creative solutions. It's like cross-pollinating ideas to create something new and unexpected.
Precisely. Imagine a project where AI specialists, photographers, and sociologists all work together to create like a multimedia installation that explores Taiwan's future identity. Or, environmental scientists, artists, and community organizers could collaborate on a participatory art project that raises awareness about climate change.
Those are some great examples. It's using creativity and collaboration as tools for social change. And documenting projects like that through photographic ethnography could help share their insights with a wider audience, spark new discussions, and inspire even more action.
Absolutely. And lastly, the source material emphasizes the importance of strengthening those programs that connect different generations and communities. This goes back to what we talked about before about how vital family and those intergenerational bonds are in Taiwan.
Yeah, it's acknowledging that Taiwanese identity is rooted in those relationships. And by strengthening those connections, we can help bridge the gap between generations and make sure that cultural knowledge and traditions continue to be passed down. What kind of programs does the source suggest?
It proposes creating community centers where older generations can share their stories and cultural knowledge with younger people through storytelling sessions, workshops, and mentoring programs.
Hmm.
And of course, these sessions could be documented through photographic ethnography, building this visual record of shared memories and connections between generations.
That's a beautiful way to honor the past and inspire the future at the same time. Those photographs would be these tangible reminders of the continuity of Taiwanese identity, showing how it's woven together by the experiences and contributions of every generation.
And that wraps up the action steps laid out in the source material. It's pretty comprehensive, covering everything from education and cultural preservation to taking care of the environment and encouraging dialogue between generations. It's ambitious, but it also gives you this feeling of hope.
It definitely paints a picture of a future worth fighting for.
Yeah.
But before we get too caught up in all this optimism, I think it's important to remember that these are just steps, starting points, not the finish line. The real work is in actually putting them into practice, taking these ideas and turning them into concrete actions that bring about real, lasting change.
I completely agree. And it's something we all have to be involved in, individuals, communities, policymakers, everyone. But I think what's really important is that this source material gives us a framework to work with, a shared vision that we can all strive for together.
It's like a call to action, reminding us that we all have a part to play in shaping the future of Taiwan's identity. And that's a pretty powerful message to leave our listeners with. But before we wrap things up, I think there's one more layer to this conversation that we need to explore.
Oh.
What were you thinking?
Well, we've been talking about photographic ethnography as a way to understand Taiwanese identity, right? But it can also be used to shape that identity, to influence how Taiwan sees itself and how the world sees Taiwan.
That's an interesting thought. It's like those photographs aren't just passive reflections of reality, they're actively shaping the story of what it means to be Taiwanese.
Exactly. And that brings up some really interesting questions. Who gets to take these photographs? Whose stories are we hearing? And whose stories are being left out? What messages are being sent, whether it's on purpose or not?
It's like a reminder that every photograph, even the ones that seem totally objective, comes from a certain perspective, a set of values, a specific goal. And when you're dealing with something as sensitive and complex as identity, those choices really matter.
They definitely do. And the source acknowledges this by stressing how important it is to be ethical in photographic ethnography, especially when working with marginalized communities. It's about making sure that the people being photographed have a say in how they're represented, that their stories are told with respect and sensitivity.
So it's not just about taking pretty pictures or capturing these exotic moments. It's about using photography to empower people, to give a voice to those who might not be heard otherwise or who might be misrepresented.
Precisely. And I think that's what makes photographic ethnography so captivating. It has the potential to not just document reality, but to challenge it, to start conversations, and to inspire change.
It's like those photographs are windows into different worlds, different ways of seeing and experiencing life. And when we share those perspectives, we can help people develop empathy, understanding, and a deeper appreciation for the complexities of human identity.
And that brings us back to the big question we started with, what is Taiwan? I think what we've learned through this deep dive is that there's no easy answer, no simple definition. Taiwan's identity is constantly changing, it's multifaceted, and it's this tapestry woven together from history, culture, innovation, and this constant desire for progress.
And photographic ethnography allows us to see that tapestry in all its richness and complexity. It gives us a look into the lives, stories, and dreams of the people who call Taiwan home.
And it challenges us to look deeper, to question what we think we know, and to have real conversations about what it means to belong, to change, and to build a future that reflects the best of what Taiwan has to offer.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm just struck by how powerful photography is, how it can shed light on the human experience.
Yeah.
And I'm also so inspired by the resilience, creativity, and spirit of the Taiwanese people.
Me too. It makes me wonder, how could you use photographic ethnography to explore and understand the identity of your own community? What stories are just waiting to be told through images? What connections could be made?
That's something for you to think about as you continue your own explorations. Maybe even grab a camera and start documenting the world around you. You might be surprised by what you find.
Thanks for coming along with us on this journey.
Until next time. So you were saying there's one more layer to all this.
Yeah, we've been talking about photographic ethnography as this way to understand Taiwanese identity,
Right.
but it's also a way to shape that identity, how Taiwan sees itself and how the rest of the world sees it.
That's a good point. It's like those photos aren't just, passively reflecting what's happening. They're actually playing a role in creating the story of what it means to be Taiwanese.
Exactly. And it brings up some really interesting questions like who's taking these pictures in the first place? Whose stories are they telling? And whose stories are we not seeing? What messages are they sending, even if they don't mean to?
It reminds you that every photo, even the ones that seem completely objective, is coming from a specific viewpoint, a set of values and agenda. And when we're talking about something as personal and complicated as identity, those choices are important.
Absolutely. And the source material acknowledges this by emphasizing how important ethical considerations are in photographic ethnography, especially when working with marginalized communities.
Hmm.
You have to make sure the people being photographed have a voice in how they're being portrayed, that their stories are told with respect and sensitivity.
So it's not just about, getting a nice shot or capturing some exotic moment. It's about using photography to give people power, to give a voice to those who might not otherwise be heard or who might be misrepresented.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes photographic ethnography so powerful, so compelling. It can do more than just document what's real. It can challenge it, start conversations, and inspire change.
It's like those photos are windows into these different worlds, different ways of seeing and experiencing life.
Yeah.
And by sharing those perspectives, we can help people develop empathy, understanding, and a deeper appreciation for how complex human identity really is.
Yeah, and it all circles back to that question we started with, what is Taiwan? I think what this deep dive has shown us is that there's no single answer, no simple definition. Taiwan's identity is this dynamic, multifaceted thing that's always evolving. It's this tapestry woven together from history, culture, innovation, and this constant striving for progress.
And photographic ethnography lets us see that tapestry, all its richness and complexity. It gives us a glimpse into the lives, stories, and hopes of the people who make Taiwan their home.
It also pushes us to look beyond what's on the surface, to question our assumptions, and to have meaningful conversations about belonging, evolution, and building a future that reflects the best of Taiwan.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm just left feeling amazed by the power of photography to illuminate the human experience.
Yeah.
And I'm also really inspired by the resilience, creativity, and unwavering spirit of the Taiwanese people.
Me too. It makes me wonder, how could you use photographic ethnography to explore and understand your own community's identity? What stories are out there waiting to be told through images? What kind of connections could you make?
That's a great question for everyone to think about as they continue their own exploration. Maybe even pick up a camera and start documenting the world around you. You might be surprised by what you find.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.
Breathe deep, close your eyes, and surrender to the cards. Let the rhythm of the symbols take you far. In the dance of the arcana, see your story start to bloom. Every flip, every turn, it's like magic in the room. Tarot trance, feel the vibe, let your spirit